HMS Cambeltown was a Wicks-class destroyer, most famous for its part in the raid on Saint Nazaire in 1942. The Buchanan was named after Franklin Buchanan, the first superintendent of the Naval School at Annapolis, holding the post in 1845 until 1847, after a 30-year naval career. He then went on to serve in the Mexican War and in Perry's expedition to Japan, but who ended up in the Confederate Navy during the Civil War. The Buchanan was laid down at Bath, Maine on June 29, 1918. Launched on January 2, 1919, and commissioned on January 20, 1919. She joined Division 18 destroyer squadrons, Atlantic Fleet in Cuban waters in February 1919, and took part in the winter maneuvers of 1919. In April, she moved back to New York. She was then allocated to Division 13. The Buchanan took up her station on May 11th. In July 1919, the Buchanan was used to carry Rear Admiral Charles Plunkett, Vice President Thomas Riley Marshall, and other dignitaries as they went to visit President Woodrow Wilson as he returned from the Paris Peace Conference. Later in the month, she departed for the West Coast, where she took part in a series of fleet reviews before joining her unit on February 9, 1920. She was placed into the rotating reserve, and she spent the next 2 years operating with a reduced complement before she was decommissioned on June 7, 1922. In 1929, the Buchanan was chosen to replace one of the destroyers in the worn-out Yarrow boilers. The work was partly carried out with the crew of the worn-out destroyer Somers DD-301. And on April 10, 1930, the Somers was decommissioned and the Buchanan recommissioned. While the crew swapped ships, the Buchanan joined the battle force and took part in 6 months of exercises. Amongst her crew in 1930 to 32 was James Henry Doyle, who went on to command the U.S. fleet during the Incheon landings in 1950. In the first half of 1931, she combined operations with the fleet and work as playing guard for the Saratoga CV-3. In early August, she took naval reservists on a 2-week-long training cruise before returning to a normal operations. In January 1932, she departed for Hawaii to take part in Army-Navy Grand Joint Exercise No. 4. She was then used as a radio relay vessel for battleships before taking part in fleet problem 1913, which covered all aspects of convoy warfare. She then returned to California, where she joined Destroyer Squadron 2 for more exercises. In 1933, she took part in Fleet Problem 4, a mock battle between Hawaii and the West Coast. She spent the rest of the year and first months of 1934 operating along the U.S. West Coast. Her captain from February 2nd, 1934 was Theodore E. Chandler, who went on to serve as an admiral in most theaters of the Second World War. In April 1934, she was moved to the West Indies to take part in the year's exercises before returning to the West Coast. Later in 1934, she was used for a Naval Reserve officer training cruise before, on July 14th, she joined the rotating reserve. On December 19th, 1934, the Buchanan received a new crew and rejoined the active fleet. She remained on the West Coast until April 1935, when she departed for Hawaii to take part in Fleet Problem 6. The rest of the year was spent on the West Coast, with a brief spell at the Naval Research Laboratory, where she was used to test out possible camouflage schemes. In 1936, she spent most of the time in normal operations on the West Coast. She also took part in Fleet Problem 7 and the celebrations to mark the opening of the Golden Gate Bridge, where she acted as a plane guard. On April 9th, 1937, she was decommissioned once again. On September 30th, 1939, she was recommissioned to take part in the Neutrality Patrol. She joined Div 56, Desron 32, and in December 39 moved to Puerto Rico, where she remained for a month. She operated with the Neutrality Patrol in the Caribbean, South American waters, and the Gulf of Mexico. As the HMS Cambeltown, the Buchanan was one of the destroyers chosen for the Destroyers for Bases deal. She reached Halifax on September 6th, and on September 9th she was decommissioned from the U.S. Navy and joined the Royal Navy, where she became HMS Cambeltown. She joined the 1st Town Flotilla and reached Belfast on September 26, 1940. She was then allocated to the 7th Escort Group, based at Liverpool, to operate on the western approaches. Her first spell of Royal Navy duty ended on December 3rd, 1940, when she was damaged in a collision in Liverpool. The repairs lasted until March 41, and while they were underway, she was allocated to the Royal Netherlands Navy. However, the plan collapsed after the Dutch wanted to rename her, breaking the connection with an American town. Instead, part of her crew was provided by the Polish Navy. The Cambeltown returned to convoy escort duties once the repairs were over. On September 15th, she rescued survivors from the Norwegian tanker Vinga. after she was sunk by air attack. On January 25th, 1942, she shot down a German aircraft. By now, plans were in place for a daring raid on the French port of Saint Nazaire, and in particular the Normandy dock, the only dry dock on the French Atlantic coast that could take the German battleship Tirpitz. The Cambeltown's role in the attack would be to act as a massive bomb. She would be stuffed full of 24 depth charges, rammed into the dock gates, and scuttled. The depth charges were to detonate 2.5 hours later. The Cambeltown set sail for Saint Nazaire on March 26, 1942. The attack began just after midnight on March 27th, and the Cambeltown successfully carried out her part in it. She rammed the dock at 1:34 a.m., and her landing parties were able to get ashore and damage some of the machinery. The explosion went off as planned, putting the dock out of use for the rest of the war. Her commander, Lieutenant Commander Beatty, was awarded the Victoria Cross for his part in the attack.
Destroyed their destroyer. Engine boost activated. Deactivated. Solved, sir.